heaven, everything is fine in heaven. Everything is fine in heaven. Everything is fine.
Hello, this is Greg Smalley on Pod 366, a Weird Movies podcast. Joined today to my left, or perhaps right, by L. Rob Hubbard. And
Hello again.
beneath me, as always, is Pete Turbovich.
Here again.
And we are here today mainly to talk about David Lynch and pay our last respects to Mr. Lynch and go over his career and what he meant to us personally, perhaps. I was out of the country when his death was announced. So I was not really able to do anything at the time. Giles did do a nice little 1-minute tribute. The news actually broke, I think, while you guys were recording the podcast that he had died. And
Yeah.
I think we had just finished recording, and I was kind of going through checking mail and such, and I saw the notice on Facebook, and I went like, "What?"
Yeah.
And then like looking around and found the obituaries, and it's just like, "Oh my God!" So,
And yeah, I didn't have anything prepared in written form. Pete has written a pretty good little article about David Lynch that we're going to link on the blog and maybe in this YouTube post too. And I encourage everybody to go there once we supply the link and read that. Pete, do you want to just give that, tell people how they can reach it without the link?
Oh, well, it's on Medium, and it's under, I forget the exact title. I think it was R.I.P. David Lynch, In Heaven Now, Where Everything is Fine, which I see a lot of people using for tribute line for him as well. But it's on my Medium account. You'll really have to follow the link.
Yeah, okay.
Probably.
Okay. Well, before we get started, there are new releases this week, and there are actually quite a few of them. We are not going to discuss these in detail. I'm just going to, maybe one of them we want to talk a little bit about because it's strange and nobody knows what it is. But here's just a list of things that came out this week, mostly on DVD. There's Feed, which is a little perverse thriller I haven't seen, but is reviewed on the site by Pamela DeGraff way, way, way back when the site just started.
Wow.
A bunch of Tarantino 4Ks dropped this week. Two of them, the two Kill Bills, probably the ones that are most noteworthy for us. I know Robert will be picking those up. I'm kidding.
yeah.
I'm kidding. Robert, not a big Quentin Tarantino fan, I believe. This is a little Japanese movie called Love and Crime. I'll have more description on the blog post. Don't know much about it. It's a anthology movie about 4 female killers from, oh gosh, what's the guy's name? The director.
Teru Ishii.
Teru Ishii. There are a bunch of different Ishis. He's Teru Ishii. He did one other movie that we've covered, Blind Woman's Curse. And so that's another movie from him which looks quite interesting. That's out from Error. Guy Maddin's Rumours is out now. New version, 4K version of The Cell is out. And of course, The Substance, which today just got nominated for 3 Academy Awards, I believe.
Best Picture being one of them. So it's like.
Best Picture, I think Demi Moore has a legitimate shot to actually win the Best Actress award.
Yep. That movie's been really big for Demi Moore.
Yeah. Also, now Sundance Film Festival is out. It's happening starting today, January 23rd. I looked over very briefly looked over the lineup and didn't see anything that looked especially interesting. So we're not going to cover it. We're going to maybe wait to see what people say. Maybe there's some surprise, real weird film that's going to come out there. Usually there's at least one thing that shows up at Sundance. I didn't see anything. I don't know if you guys know what's playing at Sundance, but anybody? No.
Haven't even checked it yet, so I
We'll
guess I'll
just
do so.
we'll just wait on that one. There is a new the new Jamin Winan's film is now out. It had been in a sort of a limited release. I know they say it's here on our. It's called The Myth of Man. It's a fantasy, a lot of green screen, but looks very cool. From the guy who did Ink. It played Chicago already. It's in New York, Los Angeles, and Denver this week, and some European dates after that. And we will definitely check it out and maybe even get a guest for that one. So just keep an eye out for that. I know we have discussed it before in the site. And the final one was the one that might require a little bit of discussion. It's called Ed and Rooster's Great Adventure, and I will have the trailer linked on the blog post. It is a movie about two seagulls visiting alternate realities. As you can see from the poster here, there's two seagulls. One has a speech balloon that says, "What human voodoo is this?" And the other says, "It's a portal into alternate realities." And if you watch the trailer, it is really footage of seagulls and people.
Voice dubbing over the top of it, yeah. And apparently the entire story is just the seagulls.
Yes, but they go into alternate realities. So what could that possibly mean?
That's wow.
Probably an update of Jonathan Livingston's Seagull.
Yeah.
I saw went to the link in the trailer, and I don't know, I'm just kind of dumbfounded.
No
it looks
idea.
like it's very low budget.
Yes. Oh, yeah. It's super low budget. It's just footage of seagulls with people talking over it, and some very simple graphics. No idea what to expect from that one. I think it may be free on YouTube. I don't know where it's at. I'll have to do some more research. But that's called Ed and Rooster's Great Adventure. Very strange idea. No idea. Probably not too good, but maybe interesting nonetheless. All right, but now let's talk about David Lynch, who is kind of major topic for our site. Probably, he's probably been. I have 7 pages on the site so about 70 articles mentioning David Lynch on 366 Weird Movies. And probably has the highest hit rate with only 10 feature films and 3, 4, 5, 6 of his 10, 6 or 7 of his 10 feature films were certified weird. So that is an incredible hit rate. I think Hodorowski's hit rate is higher, but he has much fewer films.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't want to go. I don't know how. This is very free form discussion. I don't want to go through each film one by one. Maybe we'll talk about them. But I thought maybe one thing we could do is just discuss each of us how we discovered David Lynch. And I'll start and then let let Ron and you guys can think about try to remember how you discovered David Lynch. So I probably first saw The Elephant Man when it first came out in the theater, and probably I liked it. It wasn't, I was probably 13 or 14. Wasn't the kind of movie normally a 13 or 14-year-old boy would find appealing. I certainly liked it. Uh, I am not an animal line stuck in my mind. This image that we have here of the a very spooky kind of hood he has with one eye hole cut out because he only has one eye. Very was very frightening image. And then next I saw Dune in the theater, and I was a big Dune fan, had read the book, and was underwhelmed. There were good things in it, but I was underwhelmed by Dune when I saw it on the big screen. This was a movie that got taken away from David Lynch and recut. It was very confusing, even to somebody who had read the book. It was confusing and difficult to follow. There were some memorable scenes, like this scene of Sting in whatever he's wearing there, a little codpiece designed in the shape of some wings. So that was underwhelming. I didn't really know who David Lynch was at the time. I didn't connect that those two movies had both been directed by the same person. But then I circled back around and saw Eraserhead on VHS in the early VHS years when I was doing my, looking at the classics and movies I'd heard of. Was absolutely blown away by Eraserhead, and first really truly surreal movie I'd seen that was surreal from start to finish all the way through, and I just loved it. But that's not where my introduction story to David Lynch ends, because then I went to college in Texas and met a guy who was also a Eraserhead fan, and we talked a lot about Eraserhead. And we had planned to go out, about four of us, and search for peyote because we're 18, and we believed that we were near, reasonably near the Mexico border. It was some arid land, and we just believed that there was probably peyote growing on the side of the road that we could just go out and harvest, very foolishly. But the night we had planned out to go and find some peyote, my friend, who was the Eraserhead fan, discovered that there was a new David Lynch movie out. And so we got a little high and drank some, probably some Mad Dog fortified wine, and went to the theater and sat down and watched Blue Velvet. And so this is where my true love of David Lynch begins, because seeing Blue Velvet on what may have been the opening night in Dallas, Texas, and I didn't even know it was coming. I knew I liked Eraserhead. I knew who David Lynch was. I sat down, watched. I still think it's maybe the greatest opening sequence in the history of movies, where it's that white picket fence reality, and then the camera dives into the lawn, and you find the scurrying beetles and the severed ear. Just brilliant, scary irony. And of course, you're watching it mesmerized, and then suddenly this scene with Dean Stockwell singing comes on. And so then at that point, David Lynch became the man for me. A couple years later, Twin Peaks debuted. I found out it was coming out. I told everybody, we have to sit down and watch this. The pilot was great. Everybody loved the first season. And the second season arrived, and anyway, I still love David Lynch after that, but I was all in. So that's my David Lynch introduction story. Robert, how did you find it?
My introduction story, it's similar to yours, very similar to yours. My first Lynch film that I saw in the theaters was The Elephant Man, but I had heard of him before. I'd heard of Eraserhead, had read about Eraserhead. It was like in magazines like Cinefantastique and such, and everyone was kind of going, ah, but it never got. But of course, it was never going to get to Southeast Missouri at that time. Plus, I was only like about, I think at the time when it came out, I was like 10 or 11, and
Yeah.
probably about 15 when Elephant Man came out. And I liked Elephant Man. I think it is one of his best films. And I guess if that's your first exposure to Lynch, it's kind of it's kind of good in a way because it does sort of like the overt weirdness is kind of, it's there, but it's very muted, and it's in service of the story, which I guess is a project that was brought to that didn't originate with him. It was again produced by Mel Brooks' company, and he's to be commended for actually taking the chance on Lynch and giving him control and not kind of bigfooting him, trying to fit it into a specific mold. A few years later, it was Dune. Um, I'm not so much a fan of the books. I'd heard about Dune. I had not read it at that time. Um, I've heard that fans say that it's hard to follow. I personally didn't have any problems following it. It wasn't until like years afterwards I read the book, um, and kind of saw what people were talking about. But I find the book to be a bit of a slog, personally.
I read
Uh,
half.
it's not, and it's flawed. And it's, in retrospect, it's very flawed. But I think there's enough there to where I like the texture, I like the look, um, and the cast is great. So I don't consider it to be like, oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. It's not what people were expecting. I think it was kind of like riding the wave of post Star Wars, and there was like all this expectation. You know, they were like Dune toys and such, and coloring books and such, and it's not that type. It's not that type of thing, and didn't. It kind of hurt him, in, I guess, career wise, but not. It wasn't it didn't like stall his career. That could have happened he got until he got the Blue Velvet, which was like a few years later, and I was in college when I saw Blue Velvet. Did I go with a friend? Did I go with a friend? I think I did. I think a friend of mine in the Kansas City area. We went to an evening to see Blue Velvet. Knew who Lynch was, had no idea what the story was going to be, and it's, I will say, first, so in terms of like my full Lynch experience, kind of like seeing this was it, because there were like times, especially when Dennis Hopper is introduced, where my skin just kind of crawled, and it still has that effect every time the Frank Booth character comes in, the introduction and the gas. I would say kind of like the same feeling with Bob in Twin Peaks. And I don't know how he captured it with the actors, but one thing that Lynch is just like really good is in capturing moods. Um, and then like, after Blue Velvet, then there was Twin Peaks, and that was a big phenomenon. Um, that I don't think anybody expected, and so it took off, and then you start seeing Lynch all over the place, followed by Wild at Heart, and then immediately after it peaked, there was this backlash. Second year of Twin Peaks, that people are saying, oh, it's not that good. It fell off. Several other projects that probably people who aren't big Lynch fans haven't heard about, like On the Air, which was a 7-episode sitcom. Did 2 or 3 episodes, got canceled. He and Frost had a documentary series on Fox called American Chronicles, which also got canceled. And then Fire Walk with Me came out, and nobody liked that at all. I will say, to get back with Eraserhead, I didn't see Eraserhead until after I had watched Blue Velvet, and then kind of like after that, then things started to kind of connect, certain like tropes certain tropes that would return throughout his work, and I liked Eraserhead in terms, but I think when I saw it, I wasn't trying to figure it out, like what's going on. Part of the thing with Lynch, especially when Lynch is in this mode, you just sort of let the images play. You let the images kind of play through. I think one of the things that led to his success is that I think he realized early on that what makes his work so successful is that he did have some sort of narrative consistency and thread to kind of like take people along. There are other people who have tried to kind of do like Lynchian things that really aren't as successful, because there is no narrative to kind of bring like a mass audience along. And I think it would always appeal to like a smaller audience, especially since Lynch kind of comes out of that tradition of the surrealist films. But he's really like one of the very few who have managed to kind of consistently incorporate that into his own work and have it be a success, whether it's like financial or critical.
All right.
Yep.
That was surprisingly similar to my Lynch discovery story.
Except without the peyote and Mad Dog.
Without the peyote and Mad Dog. And by the way, that we never did find peyote. We did actually like walk to the side of the interstate, and we're like, wow, there's no peyote out here. So anyway, Pete, what was your introduction to David Lynch?
Apparently, all three of us are in the same age range, because mine's going to be third verse, same as the first. Pretty much. I was only 11 when Elephant Man came out, but I remember hearing a huge hubbub about it. I was a pretty precocious kid. I paid a lot of attention to adult business and adult news. So I heard about Elephant Man, and it made quite a splash and got a lot of awards and stuff. And I said, oh, that's interesting. When Dune came out only a few years later, I kind of gave it a pass. At the time, I was following Harlan Ellison's Watching column, and he went on for about 3.5 columns about the butcher job that the studios did with Dune. They were kind of dooming the movie before they even released it. So anyway, I never got into the Frank Herbert novels. Like I said, I read half of the first one and just went, this is just too dry. There's really only so many huge science fiction multiverses that you can digest in one lifetime. So, I'd already been through Larry Niven and Robert A. Heinlein before I got to Frank Herbert, and I was already exhausted there. So anyway, Dune's all right. The next thing I did was I caught Blue Velvet on either cable or VCR, or I was over at a friend's house and they had it on satellite. Whatever happened there. That was the first movie that really hit me and said, oh, David Lynch, oh. And I'd heard about, just like in fan magazines and whatnot and around the fringes of culture, I'd heard about Eraserhead, but I hadn't seen it yet, and I didn't get around to renting that until almost at the end of the 80s. And that is the one that went that went, oh, this guy. This was you never forget your first viewing of Eraserhead because you're just sitting there staring at it the whole time. Nothing like it, anything you've seen before in this oppressive industrial hellscape. That's the movie that made me coin the term industrial gothic for just the horrors of the industrial age. Everything in this man's life is noise and racket from boilers and whatever's going on. Steam shooting off. I still like how his bedroom window opens on a brick wall. There's nothing but a brick wall to look at right there. You can reach out and touch it. That's how. And so anyway, and then of course we get to the baby. By the time I came to the end of that movie, I was standing up out of my chair and I didn't realize it. I was watching it just the last 15 minutes. It hits hard. So anyway, then I saw that. Then at the same time, Wild at Heart came out, and I said, "Oh, a new David Lynch movie." And they said, "Oh, it has Nicolas Cage in it." And I went, "Oh, I'll wait for it on cable then." But then Twin Peaks came out, and you understand, as a weird movie fan, I was already developing my weirdo out of the way taste. I was already used to being so alienated from my usual from your standard peer group by liking all the weird things. So when I heard David Lynch coming out with a TV series and said, "Oh no, this is going to be the end of him. Oh no, this is going to fail so hard." And to my utter astonishment, the entire world went crazy about the series at the same time I did. So that was a very unique feeling. We talk about David Lynch like I guess you could say he's the poster child for weird movies himself, right? About 1,000 times more famous than almost every other director on our list. So it's really a joy seeing our unusual tastes and a storyteller for once that doesn't break everything down into alphabet soup. Standard Hollywood plots are nothing that David Lynch wants to touch with a 10-foot pole. But at the same time, Wild at Heart is kind of sort of just a standard love story. I mean, it even has a happy ending for a Lynch movie, right? Okay, but anyway, yeah. And then there's one time that I actually got to catch a first runner movie of David Lynch's in a theater. I'm not much of a theater goer, but if I see Lynch on a marquee, I'm not even walking past it. I'm going right in. Whatever I had planned was canceled, So and that was Mulholland Drive, which again, sitting in a theater with a bunch of other people reacting to it. And yes, I think it went over a few people's heads, but a lot of people were laughing in the same places and doing the same places I was. So, and what was interesting was after the movie let out, a bunch of people were just having little discussions among themselves throughout the audience, just talking about what did that mean? What did they figuring it out? Which David Lynch always referred to his viewers as detectives. And said that he prefers, instead of him explaining his own plots, he prefers people figure it out for them. So it was so fascinating seeing, yes, in the middle of a wasteland like Las Vegas is where I saw this in the theater.
wow.
To see people respond to that movie the way David Lynch intended. And I'm like, other people understand him. It's not just me. So very much a gateway director for weird movies altogether. I did eventually get around to seeing every single film in Lynch's canon.
I was going to say, did any? Well, obviously you did. When did either of you see Lost Highway? Because that kind of fell in between. I don't want to say Lynch disfavor, but I don't want to say disfavor, but it was sort of like after Fire Walk with Me, then everybody, it seemed like most of the press was kind of like off Lynch, and then like Lost Highway, which infamously the Siskel and Ebert ad, the same 2 thumbs down that that was recommended, and it didn't really return, and that Lynch didn't really return until Mulholland Drive, really. So
as a matter of fact, I think my favorite David Lynch movie is probably Mulholland Drive, and the second one is this one, Lost Highway. Lost Highway is on Canopy.com. That's the streaming service that you use your library card for, and it's on there right now, along with Eraserhead, if anybody wants to go see that. I was just rewatching some of it last night in preparation for today. So yes, Mr. No Eyebrows here, and that's I love David. I think people don't understand sometimes that David Lynch can be funny. He is a humorist. He does have a sense of humor. So in his conversations, you'll have some superior character like Mr. No Eyebrows here, completely messing with Fred's head like a cat playing with a mouse, and it's hilarious. Um, Another case like this reminds me of the part in Mulholland Drive where the cowboy comes out to talk to the director
Mm.
and completely dominates him in the conversation. Anyway, oh yes, that one there. Yeah, so Mulholland Drive, and that one there, that's Lost Highway. That came out in the late '90s, so I probably caught that on cable. Probably, I would have grabbed a theater, but like I say, I'm not much of a theater goer. But David Lynch has always consistently been, for the past 30 years, a director that I immediately sought out. Everything he did, or anything he had ties to, I went out and made a point to try to go see it. I did recently just find out about On the Air, and I remember hearing about that before. I'm going to try to track that one down somewhere.
That just got released, I guess, today. It's on the Internet Archive
Oh,
for free, so you can. And I imagine that like
wow.
now, like a lot of people will finally like discover that show because it's very rarely, unless you saw it during the network run, there was like a Laserdisc release and a VHS release that was kind of like really rare. Again, it's a show that like really hardly anybody knows about, and it's kind part of the thing. And I guess not so much a warning as sort of an explanation. If you didn't sort of like the wackier elements in Twin Peaks, especially during that second year, you might you might have a problem with On the Air, because again, it's a sitcom. It's a half-hour sitcom. It's set in the late 50s at this very obscure uh, network, very obscure network that's struggling. And I guess as the show, there's 7 episodes, but as it progresses, uh, uh, it has this like has been actor Lester Guy, who's like Ian Buchanan, who was Lucy's boyfriend in that second year of Twin Peaks. Um, he's there. It's a variety show that's based around him, and essentially, uh, during the live broadcast, everything goes wrong, but it proves to be a hit with the audience. And it's sort of like this whole like goings on. It's sort of like a if you know the movie My Favorite Year. Um, it's kind of the Lynch version of that, and I should say Lynch Frost version because he also developed the show with Mark Frost.
Mark Frost, kind of a mystery guy, really, because he's not. I mean, he obviously collaborated with Lynch on the TV series, but he doesn't have a public persona the way Lynch does. So I think he
Oh,
adds. I'm sure he adds a lot to Twin Peaks and to the flavor of Twin Peaks, which is a little bit different than David Lynch on his own, I think. But really,
kind of.
do you know much about Mark Frost?
Yeah, so because Mark Frost was, I guess, known like from television. He was a writer for Hill Street Blues. I guess at that time in like the late '80s, that was like the main project. And at that time, this was like post Dune. Well, no, tw post Blue Velvet, and they were trying to kind of he was looking for work, and he got packaged with Mark Frost to develop projects. And the two found out that they had an affinity. They had tried to develop like a couple of feature films that never got came to fruition. One was kind of like a biography of Marilyn Monroe called Goddess, which was based on a book. Um, kind of similar to like what would be done with Blonde. That Blonde came out like years later, and there was a comedy to be made with called One Saliva Bubble with Martin Short and Martin Short and Steve Martin, which from what I've read was these weird goings on. What happens with this with the satellite that malfunctions and body swapping, and it was set to go, and then that's when it was with Dino De Laurentiis company, and then they went bankrupt. So that went nowhere, and they sort of like out of that kind of developed Twin Peaks together. Um, and just a note, and everybody kind of says Lynch because, well, obviously the visual element, uh, but Frost is just as important. And what doesn't get brought up is that for all the praise that David Lynch gets, he's a actually really good collaborator because the projects that he did with Frost, the Straight Story was written by his wife at the time, Mary Sweeney, and both Wild at Heart was based on a novel by Barry Gifford, and then he and Gifford together later came up with Lost Highway. Uh,
Ah,
yeah. So everything kind of gets under the umbrella of Lynch, but when you look into it, I think he's what gets overlooked is that he is a very good collaborator with people. It's just sort of like when it comes out, everybody focuses on oh, it's David Lynch masterpiece and such, and it did kind of cause some friction, especially when Twin Peaks um, got to be so when Twin Peaks was a phenomenon and everybody kind of attributed it to Lynch. It did lead to some friction, but I guess they settled that well in time because they came back together to do The Return uh, in the last decade.
All right. Hey, we have 1 minute left, so let's take a break and come back.
Okay.
I just have a little bit more to discuss. I'm not done. I don't know if you guys have more to say. Probably it's a big subject, so let's take a little break and come back. And we will
Okay.
see you. No time will pass for you, and we will be right back. All right, and we are back to discuss more about David Lynch. I wanted to read some excerpts from an article. It was probably my favorite article about David Lynch, not by a film critic. It's by David Foster Wallace, the novelist.
oh, I've seen that.
Mhm.
It's called David Lynch Keeps His Head, and he was on the set of Lost Highway when he wrote this. And of course, he didn't, he's on the set and he didn't interview David Lynch. He didn't do it. He like watched one scene. Lynch was busy, didn't want to talk to him. He didn't want to talk to Lynch because he's kind of shy. But he wrote this really great appreciation of Lynch's work. And I just want to read some of it. Again, it's called David Lynch Keeps His Head. You can find it in the anthology. Well, it's not showing up. A supposedly fun thing I'll never do again, which is a really
Good
fun book.
collection of his essays. Yeah.
Collection of essays. But he talks about Lynchian. What an academic definition of Lynchian might be that the term refers to a particular kind of irony where the very macabre and the very mundane combine in such a way as to reveal the former's perpetual containment within the latter. So the macabre contained within the mundane. I think that's pretty much gets to the core of what we mean by Lynchian. It's that tension between the mundane and the macabre. And he talks about some things. He says that like 60% of the people you see like in an airport after 3 a.m. are Lynchian people. And, there's people that are kind of ugly or grotesque and look sad without explaining quite why, have maybe unexplained bandages or things like that. I'll read another quote about Blue Velvet. He says, "The movie's obvious themes, the evil flip side to the picket fence respectability, the conjunctions of sadism and sexuality and parental authority and voyeurism and cheesy 50s pop and coming of age, etc., were for us, Lynch fans, less revelatory than the way the movie's surrealism and dream logic felt. They felt true, real. And the couple of things just marvelously off in every shot. The yellow man literally dead on his feet, Frank's unexplained gas mask, the eerie industrial thrum on the stairway outside Dorothy's apartment, the weird detente vagina sculpture hanging on an otherwise bare wall over Jeffrey's bed at home, the dog drinking from the hose in the stricken dad's hand. It wasn't just that these touches seemed eccentrically cool or experimental or arty, but that they communicated things that felt true, which I think is a very, he identifies most of the scenes that are great. I would add the mock karaoke scene, which is in Blue Velvet, which is, the scene that really got me. There's that mundanity. You're in a terrifying situation and suddenly you feel like you might be killed. And then suddenly they pause to do karaoke song. I mean, then you really know all the rules are out the window. You have no idea what's going to happen. But I thought that was interesting, so I wanted to bring it up. Anything you guys want to share in our final session about David Lynch?
Pete, you want to go first, or?
I can ramble.
We haven't really discussed his last half of his career as much as the first half.
Yeah. Well, especially like leaning into a second half there of his career. I think people forget too that David Lynch was into transcendental meditation, and he was very much a student of Eastern philosophy. I think a little bit of either Buddhist or Hinduist beliefs are suggested by a lot of his stories. In Lost Highway, it seems like there's this thing. Maybe this is taking place in the universe of shapeshifters.
Mm-hmm.
And Renee is originally, she's turning into somebody else in that one bedroom scene. She's putting on makeup, suggesting that she's trying on a different face. Fred talks about his dream with Renee. This is the beginning parts of Lost Highway. Fred talks about his dream, and Renee saying that he found her in the house, but it wasn't her. It looked like her, but it was somebody else. And then later on, simply replacing that character now with the name of Pete, the guy that's a mechanic, and then going through his story, and then running up against Patricia Arquette's character in her alternate form. So now, is this a Hindu-style wheel of karma going around? Maybe, Fred suspected Renee of cheating, and a random passing God just decided to play with him and say, you want to find out everything? You're going to know more than, you're going to know so much your brain's going to explode. That's basically what what happens to this character is he gets a revelation when he becomes a different person and sees like a cheating and seduction story play out with his role and the other man's role this time. So
that's an interesting point. To that point, I posted something on the 366 Weird Movies Twitter, retweeted. I call it Twitter. Other people call it X and
Zitter.
But David Lynch literally believed in reincarnation, and so this is him discussing his beliefs about the afterlife, and he believed in reincarnation. So maybe that is a way to see the identity changes in Lost Highway as a literal description of reincarnation. Also in this David Foster Wallace uh, essay here, he has a subheading that says, "How many different ways can Lost Highway be interpreted?" And then he answers, "Approximately 37." So the
Okay.
greatest is one. So yeah, that's a good point, Pete.
The same kind of energy translates over into Mulholland Drive too, because by the end of Mulholland Drive, we see all of the characters have been rearranged in this universe.
Mhm.
It's like as soon as they get to the point where they open the blue box, the entire movie just gets torn up and rewritten with everybody in different roles and shifted around. And Betty finds her life just everything that was good in her life gets stripped away from her and handed to somebody else. Even her own name at the end. So that could be another thing where it's basically the contrast between the first half where things are going great for Betty and she really doesn't seem to appreciate her blessings, and she did kind of exploit the girl living with her, the amnesia case. After all, that wasn't a consenting adult. That was a concussion victim, right? She should be in a hospital. But so maybe there's a suggestion that karma came into play in the story, and the universe was just so outraged at Betty that it just tore her to pieces and just handed her life out and everybody else. She ended up with nothing. So yeah, okay, that's my two karma comparisons for those two movies.
And
that's the thing. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to point out that this idea of characters changing into other characters shows up in the second half of Lynch's career because, as you say, it's in Lost Highway, it's in Mulholland Drive, it's pretty much in Inland Empire where everybody's changing.
Yeah.
And then it's definitely in Twin Peaks: The Return where there's like a new version of Laura Palmer at the end. So.
Wow. Okay.
Well, you could even say that the seeds of that even go back to the original broadcast of Twin Peaks, where Cheryl Lee plays Laura and her cousin Maddie, who, well, spoilers, everybody, who meets the same fate. One of the things with Lynch is that he actively encouraged his audience to bring their own interpretations to his work. He may have, I guess, like in terms of things like, most notoriously, he never really did explain. People were running like Eraserhead, like what's it about? And he would drop very oblique hints, but he never said anything direct. And that's kind of a brilliant thing through all of his work, especially in the latter half, where you have, like, I guess with TM and bits of Buddhism, Taoism. I don't know enough about the religions to like comment responsibly, but in the return you have the thing with tulpas, with these doppelgangers, and the tulpas come into play in the return, and especially, I guess, Lost Highway, where it's a main thing. But you don't really see very many commercial directors like actively encouraging that. It's not that's I think what Richard Kelly needed to learn when people would bring their own interpretations of Donnie Darko. It's just no, it's this. No, it's this, and he did that version, and it just kind of, in my opinion, was kind of like meh.
Yeah. I think a couple of things. There's a famous David Lynch quote where a guy was interviewing him about Eraserhead, and David starts talking about and dropping hints, as you said, about what he thinks about it, and then the interviewer says, "Interesting. You care to elaborate?" And David says, "No."
Yeah, what David Lynch said was that Eraserhead was his most spiritual movie, I believe, was the context of that quote. And And once again, with Eraserhead, now you're definitely looking at an Old Testament God here. You could take Eraserhead as the couple being punished for their original sin of carnal relations without a marriage. Because when they go to the mom's house and announce, that she's pregnant, and the entire household basically falls apart in hysterics. And then with her line saying, they don't even know if it is a baby. And before you've even seen it, that just sets you up for, whoa, this is going to get crazy fast. But
speaking of Lynch's humor there.
yeah, so it's like the baby is a punishment on them for their carnal sin from a merciless Old Testament God who does not allow takesy backsies. So I mean, you can see it that way too. Is that when he says it's a spiritual film, perhaps that was probably the core idea behind it.
Yeah, I think
That's valid.
he says it's his most spiritual film, but I think people might overlook that it's his most autobiographical film because he wrote it at a time when he was divorced from his wife and taking care of a baby alone and living in
Oh, yeah.
Philadelphia, which is an ugly industrial town. And it just is like, the nightmare exaggeration version of the reality that he was going through when he first started writing the script. Now, I think it took him like 5 to 10 years to produce. So by the time it was made, his daughter Jennifer was a toddler instead of a little baby. But
yeah, and yeah, his daughter Jennifer, Jennifer has kind of like confirmed that it sort of has basis. I guess she was born with a club. She says she was born with a club foot, and you can see like elements of that, and throughout his work, you can kind of like parse that he's probably taken elements, so autobiographical elements, and then just sort of they end up being fodder. Where it gets where it gets dangerous is that you're trying to kind of parse those down and go, oh, this means that, oh, that this means that, which is kind of missing, sort of, I guess, misses the point. I guess every artist kind of uses elements from their life to incorporate in their work. I think great artists can kind of like uh, get those elements and make them universal. So they may be like very specific to their experience, but there are elements that are more general that everybody can um, identify with. Well, for instance, like Eraserhead, I think anybody who can kind of say that, it's like it's directly my life. And it's kind of like, oh my God. But I think there are elements in the feelings that people can identify with, like the fears of a new father in in a hostile environment, um, all the way through, and I guess going through his work, Blue Velvet. I guess the one of the incidents he says he's taken from a incident in childhood where he came across where he came across a naked woman, the bit with Isabella Rossellini at the end. I have a feeling especially in the later works, Inland Empire, probably bits taken like from his time working, so I guess, and trying to get projects off the ground, uh, and and kind of things that come out of that, especially with Mulholland Drive, which kind of started out. It was intended to be a TV show, much like Twin Peaks, and then the network rejected it. And then, fortunately, he was able to go back and rework it into a feature film.
yeah,
And I guess the B story behind that is sort of like this aspiring actress, trying to break into the business, and this beleaguered director who's sort of facing all this pressure, facing all these pressures for his next project.
Yeah.
Trying to think what.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, so go ahead.
I just
Trying
want
to
to
like.
point out really quickly something. It's kind of obvious, I think, but bears repeating, and it's something that David Foster Wallace again stresses. One of the reasons he says that David Lynch is so successful and a lot of his imitators aren't is because Lynch. It's not that he has narratives. Some of the movies have narratives and they're easier to follow than others. But it's that he's very good at characterization. So the main character is somebody you can identify with usually. The Henry in Eraserhead, very strongly characterized. Jeffrey in Blue Velvet. He says you can, and since you can put yourself in there, or Mulholland Drive, since you can put yourself in that character's head and care what happens to them, then he can do anything he wants. And that's something that the detractors are the imitators, not detractors. Imitators often miss. They just go for the weirdness, but don't have that strong core of characterization where you have to identify with the character to appreciate, to be afraid for them, when the weirdness starts happening.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, all just amongst the three of us, how many like how much bad Lynch have we seen like amongst projects throughout the years? I don't want to name anything in particular, but people just sort of mistake that weirdness being Lynchian and not, and it's just sort of like, well, it's just sort of weird. It's just sort of weirdness. Lynchian is kind of its own specific thing, kind of like Cronenbergian is its own specific thing. And it's just, if you just pay attention to the surface elements, you're just going to miss it. One other thing that helps, I guess, in terms of appreciating Lynch's work, about the time that all three of us kind of got into Lynch. It helps to kind of that we were like, particularly at a younger age, and kind of more open to like the imagery and the surrealism of things. I can't imagine, like, if I saw like the age I am now, 60, 59, 60, like coming across like Eraserhead for the first time, just kind of going like, a recent thing, like seeing the Skinamarink, which Lynch, I guess, did like. I guess he met with the director. So I guess Skinamarink you can kind of term as sort of like, it was very much in that mode of Eraserhead, except that there's really no characterization, very little narrative to kind of pull you through or keep you awake, in my opinion. Fact. And it's sort of more, it's not bad, but it's sort of like more of an art installation rather than a film. And Lynch was and you can say that there are elements in Lynch's films that are kind of like like an art installations, but he sort of learned enough to kind of apply that to I guess to film, and being able to kind of catch that feeling in a film, and yet bring an audience along on that journey, if that makes sense.
It does.
Mm.
All right. Pete, do you have any final words on Lynch, or?
I could go on all day, but we are going to have to wrap up for time, right?
We got 9 minutes, so.
Okay.
Oh, we have 9 minutes?
Yeah, if you have any points you'd like to make, go ahead.
Something else about David Lynch. When we're talking about people who would imitate David Lynch, I see a lot of movies come out, especially the film festival circuit. Of course, we all do when we review movies, right? You see a lot of film festival entries where they're just being trippy for weirdness' sake.
Mhm.
That might be it, but I've never seen anybody even come close to imitating Lynch's style, and I think that plays into a lot too. Um, he kind of sort of makes. I think things are a little postmodern with David Lynch. Probably Mulholland Drive when he's examining the business of making movies, and he has that one scene that plays out when they're rehearsing for a script, and then she goes to her audition and plays the exact same scene with the same dialogue, but completely different acting. And he does that to show you what's going on there. So what a little glimpse behind the scenes at how a script can be either completely lame or actually come off as very passionate and dramatic. So in that one, yeah, let's see here. So where I was going with that is he does have some identifiable hallmarks. For one thing, David Lynch characters speak very deliberately. You know, he has that pacing, and he'll hang on to a scene. There are long stretches with no dialogue, but characters just walking around like they're almost out of their element, even if they're walking down the hall of their own house, and just weirded out by everything with sounds in the background, but nothing's actually happening. It's just somebody walking around very slowly. you know, telephones, communication, that's a big thing with Lynch. You see the chain of telephone call misconnections going through the system in Mulholland Drive when they eventually get down to the midget behind glass who's controlling everything secretly. That's another thing that happens in a lot of David Lynch films is that his villains are never cut and dried with a motive. It's not like he's a henchman who's trying to take over the world. Dick Laurent, Mr. Eddie in Lost Highway, is just generally evil without any real specification as to what he does. Same deal, of course, with Mr. Nitrous Man in Blue Velvet. Again, he says the F word a lot, and he's got a lot of sexual perversions, and he seems to have this gang of gangsters that hangs out with him all the time without really, is he selling drugs? What is this racket? So a whole lot of Lynch's villains are just evil for evil's sake and are just generally bad in a bad vibes kind of way without really being able to pin down anything. That's particular. So that's characters and pacing. Lynch says the use of sound is almost as important to him as with visuals too. So I noticed in Lost Highway you can hardly watch it with the volume at one level. You'll turn it up to catch the whispery dialogue, but then there's a smash cut to the jazz club where Fred's playing a saxophone and it's super loud Angelo Badalamenti blasting out at you. Scenes like that kind of feel like he's trying to replicate the feeling of being awake way too long and kind of jolting at every little, thing that happens. So he kind of builds up a mood there, like keeping you on edge. So Lynch uses sound a lot. His villains are always just generally evil. And the plots are less about what exactly happened and more about how everybody feels about what they've gone through at the end of the story. It's kind of like that. So that's some hallmarks of Lynch's production, I think, that are consistent almost all the way through his work.
Yeah,
how's that? All right.
I like it.
What other common elements can we find in like all David Lynch stories? Even the straight story, as much as I think that was David Lynch just making a big joke about being David Lynch, honestly. He's okay, here's a straight story for you there. Could you follow that one all right? But at the same time, it kind of has its own surreal nature to itself.
Well, I guess the other common thing, I guess everyone likes to talk about like the dark, that he's able to capture the darker aspects as well. He's also able to contrast that and capture the very light, very hopeful very hopeful aspect, hope and love, uh, and that's all through, and that's actually all through the work. Everyone likes to talk about like Frank Booth, Bob, and the evil characters. It's very, but that's also contrasted with like the straight story, which I think there is like sort of a kind of a meta joke going on there, but it's also very, but one of the things he came off is very earnest and very sincere as the things that he liked and his behavior, like the Jimmy Stewart on Mars thing that was very popular when he first started. Um, that's hard to do, and that's really hard to do. I guess as far as image, hard to kind of maintain, because as soon as people die, then stories will start to come out about like, oh my God, they were just so monstrous. And there were elements, he was kind of a horn dog, I guess. Like how many wives? Four or five marriages. But he was an artist. He said like he wanted to live the art life, and he did. uh, that's not very easy for anybody to do, much less successfully. But you haven't really heard like any sort of like real nastiness yet. It's just kind of been like this outpouring of sorrow and loss. Um, and I think that he did have that outlet. I always kind of thought that in some alternate universe, if there's like a David Lynch, who didn't have this outlet, he would have been like the most successful uncaught serial killer.
Oh, ow. Oh, wow.
Things in jars, and things in jars and liquid, but
yeah, formaldehyde, little heads in a row. Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's really mind blowing. You're a passionate director when people figure your second profession would have been serial killer.
well, so not second perfect. Like I said, that's in a worse
alternate
time.
universe.
Okay. Alternate universe, right? Anyway,
I think that's a good point. David Lynch, although he has that particular sort of irony where it's the mundane within the macabre, in other ways he's extraordinarily sincere. I mean, for example, in Blue Velvet, when Laura Dern gives this speech about the bluebirds returning and love conquering, he's not mocking that idea. That's really what he believes, that love can triumph over evil. And and his gee whiz persona was not an act, because you can't keep that up for your whole life. He was just a genuinely Midwestern nice guy who happened to be able to channel those dark thoughts that we all have into his movies. But I do believe he was a genuinely nice and sincere person who really believed in good in the world.
And for the most part, he was able to really do work that, with some exceptions, was relatively unmolested. Although people talk about Dune being losing control of Dune, and this is my soapbox. Everyone's has been wanting, there's a director's, when will we see the director's cut of Dune? And one of the things I've noticed is that with that experience is that he did have some control, but I think that was like the first time that he had to make that there was like concessions, how long the movie was going to be, some of the things that he probably wasn't able to do. And I think he felt that it was artistically compromised. Like I said, it's not bad, but I don't think but I guess he wouldn't put it amongst his upper level of work. That's like that said, if anything, this will kind of like kill the moment of any kind of director's cut of Dune. It's like, it ain't happening. We only have 2 minutes. I could easily go off for like 10 minutes.
We could go on forever, but I think we've. I like I like the way the discussion's gone and where we've ended up. So I'm happy. I'm happy. We're celebrating David Lynch, not mourning him. So
Yeah.
I'm very happy about that, and I'm happy you two, both big Lynch fans, able to give some different insights. And I really appreciate you both being here, Robert and Pete. Any final words in that last minute?
I
There's
do
plenty
notice I saw on Twitter going around. I've seen a lot of the and social media. I've seen there's a Bod's Big Boy that people are treating like a funeral memorial to Lynch, and they're just surrounding it with trinkets and artifacts from the movie. Several people wrote like "In heaven everything's fine" on a piece of paper and stuff. It's just a memorial there. It's somewhere in LA, but pictures of this have been going around on the internet.
Yeah, very cool.
I had plenty to discover. If you just there's the films, there's also his music. If you haven't like discovered the music, there's like several albums of solo and with Angelo Badalamenti photographs. There's plenty of Lynch left for people to enjoy.
Yep, but not
Yep.
plenty of time for us to enjoy it. So thank you all. We'll
You got